Hello everyone, and welcome to a ranking of James Bonds on a spectrum of good and evil. Let's not waste any time and get started right away with James Bond in Dr. No. For me, I'm going to have this version of James Bond in Anti-Hero. The way he double taps Professor Dent, shoots him in the back. Now you could say, how evil really was this? This guy came looking for trouble. This guy came to kill Bond, and so Bond kills him. Yes, but Bond didn't have to kill him. The man was out of bullets. And you could say, well, we could counter that and make a case that Bond is good in this movie, that he should be more up toward that end of the spectrum because he's trying to save the world. But it's like, okay, we don't really get an indication of how much of a shit Bond actually gives about the world. You know, the way he carries himself around and talks to people, it's like, how much do you think he really cares? He's doing all this for Queen and Country, right? But does he actually give a shit about the world? I can't really tell. I think he loves the amenities and vices he can find within that world, but I don't know how much he actually gives a shit about people in this movie. When Quarrel gets killed, does he even give much of a shit? I don't know. I think the thing he's most upset about now is that he can no longer fetch his shoes.
Fetch my shoes.
And this version of James Bond carries over now into his next film, From Russia with Love. I'd say this is also an anti-hero. I don't really recall Sean Connery doing anything of virtue in this movie. He's just doing his duty for Queen and Country, and you could say that right there is enough of a case that he should be elevated to good. I think in both of these movies he kills about 7 or 8 people. Maybe a few more in From Russia with Love, actually, closer to a dozen. But I think every kill he makes in From Russia with Love is done in self-defense, whereas in Dr. No, there was a few questionable instances there. I mean, when you see the motivations of the main villains, and they involve killing millions of people, usually the counterpoint to that, the thing trying to stop that, can only be labeled as good. But this guy, make no mistake, is an arrogant asshole. Now, if we move on to Goldfinger, this is where I think we're going to start slipping further down the list. I'm going to have him in bad guy. We all know the reason why this version of James Bond sits further down in the depths of evil. Pussy Galore works with the villains. She's going to do what Goldfinger wants, and what that is drop a bunch of poisonous death gas on an entire fucking town of people. Goldfinger tells Bond the plot to this movie, and it seems to me like Bond is impressed by all of this. You got Goldfinger telling Bond, I'm going to do this thing that's going to result in the death of like 60,000 people, and Bond's just feeding right into it, feeding his ego, giving this guy a glory day.
I apologize, Goldfinger. It's an inspired deal. Brilliant.
Bond gets both Masterson sisters killed in this movie by being completely careless and negligent. And so what do these dumbasses do? Just playing some fucking practical joke on him down there in the courtyard, and then just pretending he doesn't exist and going to bed. What the fuck do you think is gonna happen? That'd be like fucking with the Godfather. Hey, let's get out of the bulletproof impenetrable car and go running into the trees. Man, somebody's parents were very unhappy. 2 of the most beautiful daughters on the face of the earth both fucking killed because of James Bond. And that's why people like me sit here and do things like this. Now let's move on to Thunderball. This James Bond, to me, is similar enough to the one in Goldfinger that I'm going to have him as a bad guy. The thing with Connery's Bond in Thunderball is there's a similar incident, like the one in Goldfinger with the barn. For James Bond in Thunderball, he's got 2 objectives. The top priority objective is to enjoy his vacation on his tropical island, to have fun. Objective B, aka his secondary objective, is to save the world, and he will carry himself accordingly. And this guy who helped Bond and Domino, who is pretty much responsible for saving their lives, they push him out of the boat and they throw him a floaty tube, and then Bond and Domino are off into the sky and they're fucking gone. And this guy that saved both of their asses I doubt Bond and Domino remembered to tell anybody about him, and his skeleton is still floating out there in a floaty tube to this day. Moving on to You Only Live Twice. Now, the actor, at this point in his life, clearly didn't give a shit about this role, so the character is sort of compromised here, but let's just do the best we can. This James Bond is too apathetic and lethargic to give a fuck about anything. Even when guns are put in his face, he totally doesn't look like he cares if he's shot right then and there. So he's clearly a miserable person to be around, and the only person he seems to jive the best with is this wacky-ass dude named Tanaka.
I love you.
I'm glad we got that out of the way.
In Japan, men always come first. Women come second.
I might just retire to here.
I just might retire to here. You would feel that way. So James Bond wants to continue living this lifestyle, so he allows Tiger Tanaka to talk him in to becoming Japanese, marrying some Japanese woman that's chosen for him, and just get scrubbed in the tub for the rest of his days. Then when James Bond's wife dies, he doesn't seem to give much of a flying fuck. In fact, he looks kind of relieved. I think the only reason he's down in this volcano lair is because it's an opportunity to shoot some people. And he loves hanging out with his buddy Tanaka. So wherever he goes, Bond goes. There's something about this Bond that just feels like an evil son of a bitch. I think anything good that he does do is just done by happenstance. I shudder to think about some of the things Bond and Tanaka are going to do in that bathhouse. Now moving on to On Her Majesty's Secret Service. Alright, old Georgie. It's a little bit confusing throughout this movie because he sees this woman about to commit suicide. He goes and he saves her because he's probably interested in her. If this was just some fucking guy walking into the ocean to kill himself, Bond would have just kept driving. But it's a hot woman, so he goes to save her because he probably wants to fuck her afterward. Saves her, doesn't fuck her, kind of loses interest, fucks some other women. Then he kind of gets interested in her again after her dad says that he should be interested, so then he starts to like her, yet Bond is still fucking other women at the same time. But eventually he decides that he wants to marry Diana Rigg because they had a good night laying in a wagon once. And so he marries her, and then she's killed immediately. And George does look sad. So I think Lazenby's Bond is more virtuous and good of a person over all of Connery's Bonds, including Diamonds Are Forever. In this movie, I think this is a bad guy. This Bond is a bad Bond. I'm going to have him maybe right here, middle of bad guy. He meets this woman, Plenty O'Toole. A little bit annoying, but kind of adorable. Bond meets her, and, pretty much any woman Bond meets has like a 25% chance of dying somewhere over the course of the film. And this poor woman is part of that 25%. She is shackled with weights and thrown into a fucking pool. But the disturbing thing is that Bond is just chilling nearby, getting a suntan and reading the newspaper with her body in the pool. Don't you find that a little off color? I certainly do. Who would sit there so casually like that, enjoying the day with the dead body of a young girl mere feet away from you? And you're going to just chill here now? 10 seconds after this happens, he smacks Tiffany Case in the face, which doesn't do anything to help him up this board. And then later on, he kicks a cat. Any good thing, any virtuous thing that you're looking for in any of these Connery films, I swear to God, it's just out of a sense of something to do. He likes his occupation of blasting ass and going to casinos in whatever city happens to be in while he's assassinating somebody. He likes picking up pussy while he's going around doing his thing. But don't forget, Bond was not written to be Mr. Good Guy. Now moving on to Roger Moore as James Bond in Live and Let Die. Wakes up in bed with some woman. He has no idea if she's married or not. Totally in line with what we would expect. This other woman's basically able to do something of a miracle nature. And Bond relinquishes her of that by having sex with her, by tricking her, and then having sex with her, just because he wants to. He also threatens to shoot this other woman in the face after banging her.
But you couldn't. You wouldn't. Not after what we just done.
I certainly wouldn't have killed you before.
And then he kicks this random guy off a cliff. Just some guy that happened to be standing there. You can't even really tell if he's holding a gun or not. Bond just assumes he's a bad guy, or maybe Bond doesn't even care if he's a bad guy. He just thinks it would be funny to kick some guy off the cliff as he paraglides by. So all things considered, I think that James Bond in Live and Let Die is a bad guy. I think I'm going to have him toward the back. He's a pretty bad dude, man. He's dancing on the line of evil, and it's probably not going to take much more for him to get there. Oh, nope, now we've crossed the line. The Man with the Golden Gun. This version of James Bond is fucking evil. We got a long list of atrocities to go over, and you want to know what's interesting? He only kills one person in this movie, and yet I think this is one of the most evil interpretations of the James Bond character. In The Man with the Golden Gun, James Bond threatens and viciously commits battery against a helpless woman. He threatens to blow an unarmed guy's dick off. He sticks a gun in Nick Nack's face for no reason. He pushes a kid out of a boat into a dirty-ass river with another boat barreling down on him, and this was after he screwed the kid over on a deal. He kicks his sparring partner in the face while they're bowing to each other. He has sex with another woman while Goodnight watched from a closet that Bond shoved her into. We're given further insight that Bond is a horrible person during this exchange of dialogue.
I mean, sir, who would pay $1 million to have me killed?
Jealous husbands, outraged chefs, humiliated tailors. The list is endless.
He puts Nick Nack in a suitcase, then alludes to a woman that he threw it in the ocean. And when we see that he didn't, I'm convinced that this is just a dream, and that Nick Nack is still in that suitcase at the bottom of the Mariana Trench today. Now moving on to The Spy Who Loved Me. This version of James Bond is a tough one for me, because I was happy to see Roger Moore's James Bond become more likable after The Man with the Golden Gun. We get to The Spy Who Loved Me, and I can't find anything with this James Bond that I would say is evil, except for one glaring thing.
No!
What the fuck? What? Why? First of all, she's very hot, so this is a real shame. Second of all, you don't know how involved she was in the main villain's plot, so you don't have any course to do this. And third of all, when you catch up to this guy, you smack him off the roof. But that's hardly in question here. It's spinning a fucking woman into a bullet. That is the problem. That is why I want to give this Bond evil, and maybe I should. You could say if that woman was indeed bad, that this is a total non-factor and that this is indeed a good Bond, but I don't see really any reason, or I can't remember it, or I didn't catch it. I don't see any reason why that was necessary at all. I think I'm going to have to put this Bond in anti-hero, because I truly don't know. The case is still pending, to decide if this is an innocent or guilty verdict. Now let's move on to Moonraker. Now, Bond has saved the world before, but in this instance, it feels like it came the closest to actual global annihilation. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put Roger Moore's Bond from Moonraker in the decent category. I say what makes this James Bond morally questionable is what he let happen to Corinne. He used this woman, and then he forgets about her, and she gets mauled to death by Dobermans in the forest. Bond never asked about her again. Even though Corinne got eaten by dogs, it wasn't Bond's dogs who ate her. Bond didn't order them to chase her down and rip her apart. This was Drax's doing. It's just that Bond sometimes gets caught up in using people, and then they get killed, and then he just sort of forgets about them. But Bond didn't shed the blood himself. But he is sort of indirectly responsible a lot of the time. And I don't think James Bond in Moonraker does anything to demonstrate that he is an evil person. He cares enough about the world and people that he thinks that it's worth saving. Maybe just saving for himself to keep enjoying it, but nonetheless, he saves it. So, going off that, I'm going to give this version of James Bond the category of decent on the moral scope. Moving on to the James Bond of For Your Eyes Only. He gives this mantra line to this woman out of nowhere, like something he got out of his fortune cookie that day. He says to her, "The Chinese have a saying, before embarking on revenge, you first dig 2 graves." Well, he must have forgot what that fortune cookie said when he dropped a wheelchair-bound man down a chimney and when he kicked another dude off of a cliff. So he is a bit of a hypocrite in For Your Eyes Only. But I will give this Bond a little bit of credit in having restraint when a woman a third of his age comes on to him. This girl is probably a teenager, and she wants to kiss him and hug him and get in bed with him and rail him, or she wants to be railed. But Bond says no, and he even offers to buy her an ice cream. That makes him a good person. I think this Bond is a bit of a flawed person just because of his stupid mantras being in conflict with the things he actually does, but he does have the charm and likability, as Roger Moore normally does. And he may have killed a few people that didn't necessarily need to be killed, but in his mind, I guess he saw it as justice or prevention from a greater evil in order to preserve the greater good, that sort of thing. So a lot of things going for Roger Moore's Bond and For Your Eyes Only. So congratulations, you are the most virtuous Bond on the list thus far. Moving on to Octopussy, one of my favorite Bond films. Determining whether or not this James Bond should be in the category of good or evil is one of the most difficult determinations to make, because Bond clearly demonstrates caring about actual people in this movie. When he's speaking to General Orloff, he is disgusted at what Orloff is doing, much more than James Bond was when Goldfinger was revealing his plot to Bond. Bond didn't seem like he even gave a shit. So Bond has a bunch of people blown up at the beginning of this movie. Most of them were probably just workers that just happened to be there, unaware of the evils that they were serving. I mean, just look at this. Freeze frame. He shoots a young boy in the head. Bond puts one right dead center of his computer. This looks like a pure tragedy to me. But if it's the threat of nuclear weapons being rained upon the Earth, then maybe you don't have time to consider such trivial matters like this poor boy's future. In addition to that, Bond zooms a camera lens into a woman's boobs while he's supposed to be working. But that's just typical antics for James Bond when he's in Q's laboratory. This is one that's so hard to determine for myself. I'm going to have him an anti-hero, but at the top. It doesn't seem like he ever later reflects on any of the lives that he's taken. Now moving on to A View to a Kill. This version of James Bond looks like Satan, and anybody he bangs in this movie could be his granddaughter. I can't think of much else wrong with the guy. You could say that he endangers many lives as he leads police on a chase throughout San Francisco, but you can see Bond's contempt for cold-blooded murder in this movie. The villain is obviously a megalomaniacal maniac that slaughters many people in this film, and Bond seems genuinely disgusted with this. If this was happening with Sean Connery would probably just make fucking jokes. So even though this version of James Bond looks like Kenneth Copeland, I'm going to say that he is a pretty decent person. I'm going to have him as the second most virtuous Bond so far.
My cello. It's at the conservatoire.
Don't worry, I'll get you another in Vienna.
No, we must go back for it.
We have about 10 minutes, if we're lucky, before they discover what's happened.
I must get my cello.
No way.
Folks, now we've finally reached somebody that I would classify as a good James Bond. Timothy Dalton's James Bond demonstrates that he has the biggest heart of all of the Bonds. He actually goes out of his way, even disobeying orders, to do the thing that he thinks is right. In The Living Daylights, he's ordered to kill a woman. He refuses. And in most Bond films, Bond treats women like shit. In The Living Daylights, Bond treats her actually quite respectfully and charmingly. Later in the film, Bond sets this guy free from prison, even though he totally doesn't have to. And I think the only point that you could make for Timothy Dalton being lower on this list is a scene where he tears a woman's clothes off in order to distract a guard just long enough so that Bond can get the upper hand and kill the guy. So he uses this woman as bait, knowing full well that she could get killed, but I think Bond was confident enough in his training and thought that this was the best way to maximize his chances of getting out of this situation alive. So it's not a very nice thing to look at, but it is far less horrible than many things Bond has done or been implied to do. If you could only have one interpretation of James Bond on your side, I feel like the one you could trust the most is the one from The Living Daylights and even License to Kill, which I'm also going to put in the category of good. Even though this is the darkest film in the entire series, this version of James Bond, I feel, is most justified in the people he kills. Even though he does kill unarmed people, even though he does kill people in very vicious and graphic ways, because these are the people that hurt and killed his friends. He feels like the counterpoint to everything that is evil in the universe of License to Kill. It's weird that I have a Bond motivated by revenge in the category of good. I'm just putting these James Bonds sort of where I feel they go. And I feel like the Bond of License to Kill and The Living Daylights is the one that I could trust the most. He feels like the James Bond that would have your back the most. He feels like the James Bond that would choose you over the mission, because he acts according to the feelings of his moral compass rather than blind duty. And I think that's why I'm able to so easily classify both versions of Timothy Dalton's Bond in good category.
I help people with problems.
Problem solver.
I'm more of a problem eliminator.
Now let's move on to GoldenEye, my favorite James Bond film and my favorite interpretation of the James Bond character. But that doesn't mean that he's automatically in good club. This James Bond might be the most evil of all of them. Let's unpack it. Well, similar to Octopussy, both Generals Orloff and General Rumov have many minions serving under them. I'm sure that their ultimate plans operate on a need-to-know basis, so these lower-ranking soldiers would have no idea about what the fuck is going on in the grand plan. But that doesn't stop Bond from mowing them down with machine guns on his way to prevent the end of the world. Bond crashes a fucking tank through a goddamn building, running over innocent women, children, and policemen in the street. You cannot fucking tell me for 1 second that no innocent people died in this fucking pursuit. Just because you didn't see any innocent people die here doesn't mean that innocent people didn't die here. They for sure did. And I love how they show you a shot of the policeman getting out of the car just to show the audience, oh, they're all right. No, I don't think so. That is death right there.
It's what keeps me alive.
It's what keeps him alive.
It's what keeps me alive.
It's what keeps you alive. All right, Bond, well, you just keep it on up then. Well, you could have slapped the cuffs on him and threw him in a paddy wagon, but nope, you decided to drop him on a concrete from 500 feet up.
It's what keeps me alive.
Well, Mr. Bond, you do what you got to do, right? You do what you got to do. This version of Bond, I'm just going to have him straight in the middle of the list. I think he is just so programmed to get the job done that he didn't realize that he killed 4 dozen people in the streets that day. So he's just sort of blissfully unaware. All right, now let's move on to Tomorrow Never Dies. Folks, you might not have seen this coming, but this Bond is going in evil. The lower they are on the evil list, the worse they are. So far, Roger Moore's Bond from Man with the Golden Gun is the most evil, just so you understand how I'm doing this. This version of Bond is in class evil for me, and the reason why is because he launches a fucking RC car from the top of a parking garage into a crowded street with a big smile on his face. Imagine if a woman was pushing her baby in a stroller right here on the sidewalk while Bond chirpfully fucking crashes a car off of it just for fun. You might be saying, well, Bond's honking the horn as it's flying off the roof. That doesn't do much to make it better. You know, if I shot you with a gun, how much would it help if I was going beep, 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 beep at you as I was shooting at you? Not much. Then you have a scene where Bond throws a security guard into a printing press. Look at these two different guys that attack him. You have this big buff motherfucker who looks like he was just made to kill people. And then you have this fucking little worm-headed doofus who looks like he works part-time from 10 to 4 Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. And if this guy couldn't stop him, how the fuck is this guy gonna do it? This fucking corn muffin that just shows up in this red jacket. What is this goofball? Who is this silly man? What they should have done was held a 2D angle on this fight as if it was a Mortal Kombat stage, because Bond totally throws his ass off of it as if it's the pit stage. Now this guy's wife and kids are going to be wondering what happened to him. Oh, you know, he was just trying to stop some crazy man with a gun running around the fucking restricted area. So you have that. He leads a helicopter down a street full of innocent people. This movie may not show you a bunch of people being chopped up to death, but I guarantee you that they are, because there's no way they can't be. You have a crowded street full of people that can hardly even run. They can hardly even move just because of how many people there are in their way. How the hell are these people outrunning a helicopter in the street that is trying to chop them up? This is probably the most implausible part of the entire movie, that it didn't show anybody getting chopped up here, because it totally would have happened. And it totally did happen, but we're just going to have to say it happened off screen. But regardless of the movie showing you or not showing you these chopper blades cutting everybody to death, Bond's the one that led the helicopter down this fucking street full of people. And just keeping in the spirit of how Bond's acting in this movie, he executes another unarmed guy straight in the head. You could say this dude totally deserved it, but it's just an observation. Oh, and then he throws the main villain through a drill, you know, unarmed. But again, these are just observations. So then we get to The World Is Not Enough, where Pierce Brosnan's Bond has quite a dark streak about him in this movie. He kills a lot of people in this movie, a lot of them questionably. At the beginning of the movie, he kicks the shit out of a whole office full of people, killing all of them. But later, when this woman is trying to kill him, he says, "I can protect you. I can protect you." If this was a man, you think he'd be saying that? No, any fucking dude that shoots at Bond, he's just going to shoot them back. But if a woman tries to kill him, he'll try to plead with them and try to talk them down so he can sleep with them and then probably just kill them himself. He blasts Electra King, unarmed. He pops out of a trunk like a fucking Papa Weasel and executes this unarmed guy. I think this version of Bond is a bad guy. I think he's kind of emotional, and he kind of acts out, and he just pulls triggers without even really thinking. So I'm going to have him in bad guy. In Die Another Day, I think he beats the shit out of a bunch of medical staff. That was kind of unnecessary. He seems to get amusement out of shooting M during his virtual reality session, which I wouldn't say that would make you evil. I actually think it's kind of justifiable to shoot M. There is this sword fight he has in this movie that endangers the lives of many innocents. He could have very easily been whipping that blade around and opened the throat of some helpless old woman that was standing right there. You know, maybe even a child. But, you know, Bond doesn't really seem to care. His ego remaining intact is the important thing during this sword fight. You know, pretty reckless, pretty trigger happy. But he is trying to just do his job and save the world. And at the end of the movie, he even says, we got to turn in these diamonds. You know, now only a person with a fucking shiny white star up their ass would say something like that. So I think that actually just makes you more of kind of an annoying person than a good person. But I'll put him at the top of anti-hero. Now moving on to the Craig era. What's always been weird to me is that Craig's James Bond feels like two different people entirely. The James Bond of Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace is the same Bond, and completely different from the James Bond of Skyfall, Spectre, and No Time to Die. That is a completely different Bond played by the same guy. Now in Casino Royale, he recklessly pursues leads, causing destruction with definite off-screen casualties, bulldozing his way through a fucking construction site, just knocking shit over, crumbling buildings. He'll fucking knock down the gates of high heaven to get to his objective. He'll endanger the lives of people to get further intel in pursuit of his accomplishing his mission. But, he does seem a little disrupted for a moment about this woman dying, which is, totally because of him. There's this brief moment of grief on his face. Could be grief, I think. Maybe he's just sad that he's not going to get to bang her again. But he also likes to pet Vesper's head in the shower and remain clothed while he does it, so we could say that was sweet of him. I think this version of Bond is a total anti-hero and the best version of it. I'm going to have him right here in the middle. And Quantum of Solace, by extension, we could say that it's right there with Casino Royale. The James Bond in Quantum of Solace throws Matthias in a dumpster for no reason. He beats the shit out of his colleagues in an elevator after escalating tensions at an embassy. He shoots an unarmed cop in the face, one that was corrupt and trying to kill him, but did you really have to pull the trigger, Bond? I mean, the handcuffs were hanging off the guy's belt. And then mostly what's talked about is him giving Green a canister of motor oil to drink before abandoning him in the middle of the desert. Now again, we go back to that big question of, well, if the person he's killing is an asshole, then it's morally just, and so I'm not going to knock points against him. Well, take it as you will. I'm just making observations and stating facts. This version of James Bond does seem to be a little disrupted over Strawberry Fields being killed. He cares a little bit, so that's good. So I'm going to have him right here. Now moving on to my least favorite interpretation of the James Bond character in the entire series. While Bond has done plenty of other reprehensible things throughout the entire series, such as sexually assaulting women, shooting innocent people, squashing children with tanks, letting women get eaten by Dobermans, throwing unarmed people off roofs, shooting 16-year-olds in the face, blowing up buildings full of janitors and workers, sleeping with women that could be his granddaughter. Somehow all of it falls short to what Bond does to Severine in Skyfall. Severine tells James Bond that she is a former sex slave. The very next scene, Bond slips naked into the shower with her. You can see her trembling as Bond does this. Then, probably through sheer intimidation, Bond has her take him to see the main baddie on his bad guy island. She's scared out of her mind, but Bond has her take him there anyway. They walk right into a very fucking obvious trap. She gets fucking zip-tied and put at the end of a shooting range and gets fucking shot. And she's dead. And Bond doesn't care. He says some fucking quip. This poor woman was just killed, but a shame that the scotch fell off of her head. And then Bond saves himself, of course. He could have done this 10 seconds ago before Severine was shot, but nope, let's wait till she's dead first and out of my hair. Oh, look, the party's here. We can arrest Silva, and we can all go back to MI6 and throw a party. And I'm never going to bother to mention Severine again. Never again. And this movie completely abandons this character because it wants to spin the formula and have Bond run around with this old hag that has treated him like shit throughout the entire series. It's just absolutely fucking ridiculous to me. I hate this interpretation of the character, and I also feel like this version of James Bond is the most evil, and any of the good things he does in Skyfall would be nullified because of what happens with Severine. Bond doesn't even do anything good in Skyfall anyway. He fails at everything he does. He can't protect anybody. He's an idiot. And you're saying, well, why is this act, out of all these shitty things that Bond has done, why is this one the unpardonable sin? It's because of the innocence of this woman. Because she fucking told him what happened to her. Because in knowing what happened to her, he did what he did anyway. And then he just used her like a cum rag. And then she gets killed and he doesn't even have the decency to even mention her ever again. Not even show a little hint of sadness on his face about it ever. It just totally doesn't matter to him. To me, that is the most blatant and egregious act. Having an asshole framed up with good cinematography doesn't do anything to help the character out of me hating them. I separate this character in my head from all other interpretations as Bond as just an unfortunate mishap in the wonderfulness that is the James Bond universe. Now, if we move on to Spectre, I'm not going to talk too long because I kind of want to wrap this up. So this Bond is a reckless maniac, but hearkening back to the Roger Moore era with some of his witticisms and humor, and I like Daniel Craig's Bond in Spectre more than I do in Skyfall or No Time to Die. But I still think this Bond is too reckless to be considered even an anti-hero. I think a James Bond that beats the shit out of a helicopter pilot over a crowded parade is not somebody that is worth modeling yourself after. He kind of threatens Q, endangering Q's job and well-being and retirement plan, just so Bond can go on his personal vendetta quests, things like that. So I do think this is a bad guy Bond. He's just too fucking reckless and too stupid to be considered good or even moral. He's too stupid to know what morals are.
I completely understand.
So I'm going to have him as a bad guy. I just think there's things that these other Bonds have done that are worse. And then No Time to Die, I'm not even fucking ranking that. I don't even really count it as a Bond movie. I don't even want to deep dive into this movie, so it's disqualified. All right, guys. So that's the end of the list. I hope you enjoyed, and I really appreciate you hanging out with me and listening. And I'd love to hear your arguments as to why these James Bonds are good or evil or somewhere in between. I'm sure there's things that I have forgotten that would shuffle up this list a bit. I'd love to hear from you. All right, guys. So thanks for being here. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think, and wherever you are, I hope you're having a wonderful day or night.